presenters. Hi, everyone. So we are starting another panel right now. So if anyone is super bored and have nothing better to do, come join us because, we have a lot of empty spaces here. All right, so I'm Lenka Pinkot. I'm Chief of Staff to the CEO at Project Management Institute and board member at Agile Alliance. And today we will be talking about a topic that I believe impacts a lot of us, and that is AI accelerating, right? We see a lot of beautiful innovations here in the exhibition hall, but it's not only a cool stuff that AI brings, it's also literally impacting the way we work, the way we think, and now even how organizations need to be reinvented, reorganized. So we will talk about the impact on people and organizations and how does it all work together. So we know that these days there's a lot of talk about this general uncertainty, anxiety, a lot of volatility. And we see that also our bosses, CEOs, have really full plates with all of this stuff. At PMI, we actually ran a research on that, and we saw that 93% of CEOs have to rethink or challenge the assumptions of their operating or business models at least every 5 years. And 65% of them have to do that in less than 2 years or even continuously. How mad is that? Does anyone feel the impact of all of this at your work, all the change? Raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you. I love audience engagement. Right, so what we see on our data is essentially that reinvention now becomes a norm at organizations. And the question that we would like to talk about today, so how do we people find our footing in this new reality? So at PMI, what we did to approach this topic, we actually teamed up with Agile Alliance, and we got together a good bunch of global CEOs and global thought leaders, and we co-created a new manifesto for enterprise agility. It's essentially a guide for organizations, for teams, for people, how to deal with all this change and perpetuous transformation. The document itself, the manifesto, is very succinct, very simple to read. It's only 4 values and 9 principles. And we will actually deep dive in some of them today with my fellow panelists. And one last thing that I wanted to mention before I invite them on stage is not only us that we see all this change, agility, all of that. I actually checked some data published by LinkedIn recently, and they say that around 40% of C-suite these days prioritize adaptability and agility when they hire new talent. So I think this debate about agility is also really important for anyone who is just entering the workspace and want to know how to be successful. So today's theme is called Human Operating System for Enterprise Agility. And I will now welcome my wonderful panelists. So come on, guys, don't hide anymore. So I have here Christopher Westcott, Vice President for Talent Enablement at LinkedIn. Take a seat, thank you. I have Liz Keener, Chief Strategy Officer at Nortel. And I have Emily Lunt, who's Chief Information Officer at Banks Beauty. So we will kick it off with this first value of the manifesto, or the theme, which is about where do we find stability these days? Because if everything is changing, what is the stability? Where is stability coming from? And we will talk a little bit about purpose, the North Star, the guiding star. That's something that anchors us, purpose. That is the stability. But at the same time, we need flexibility in our daily operations. So how can we combine all of that? And that will be my first question for Liz, actually, Chief Strategy Officer. So Liz, how do you work with your teams, and how do you help them to balance that strategic, long-term thinking, anchoring in purpose, but at the same time, building and having that flexibility in day-to-day? What is your trick for that?
So it's interesting. I'm sure many people in the audience have shared this experience that over the course of my career, how I look at strategy has completely changed. Like we used to make 3 to 5 year plans, 3 to 5 year roadmaps. Now what could be happening to all of us in our work lives and our daily lives could be completely unpredictable 5 years from now. Yet you still need to have a plan. And you know, to the point of this panel, we need to be more adaptable and agile than ever in order to survive. So how does one do this? I think we, within my business in Nortal, we do a lot of consulting work for customers. So a lot of this is helping our customers sometimes think about their North Star, think about their roadmap, but then we also need to do that for ourselves. So each year, all of our departments will come up with what we call the big rocks, like what are we going to achieve this year? And then I am a big fan, I have always been a big fan, even if you're not practicing scaled agile methodology in full, of doing quarterly PI planning. I had an experience when I was leading a digital transformation at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center during COVID that our digital team was moving so fast that the HR department actually came to me and they said, Liz, we think that we are the ones being too slow. We're the bottleneck. We can't keep up with the pace that the digital transformation is moving. What can we do? We need to organize our work differently somehow. So I suggested that they also join us in doing the routine of this quarterly planning. So doing the planning is not only important, but being able to look back and do the retrospectives and lessons learned and all of the things that are probably part of your own daily lives and work habits are now more important than ever, because we need to, even within quarters, figure out, based on what our competitors might be confronting us with new products coming onto the market, we need to be able to pivot really quickly, but have our North Star and have the guardrails to be able to, you know, keep us moving in the direction that we are intending to go. So I think, you know, creating these big rocks, doing the quarterly planning, and really holding ourselves accountable, and then building the mechanisms or frameworks to measure, are we actually achieving what we set out to achieve, and building in that accountability to, you know, not say, oh, we missed our numbers, we missed it, we missed that. No. Why? Then going back and asking like the 5 whys of root cause analysis if something did go wrong or something went off course, getting yourself and the team back on course.
Thank you, Liz. So if I translate it for me, we are essentially saying that planning these days matters more than plans, right? Because plans, they do not hold, but planning, this is what we need to do. So let me follow up. And you mentioned a few habits, few rituals like quarterly planning or building these big rocks. So is there any ritual or habit that your teams would say, oh, this is our favorite, we're really looking forward to that? What do they like to do in this flux situation?
Well, not to plug a specific tool, but I have recently started using Notion. And we have a meeting every Monday where all of our team leads will go through and share what they're focused on for the week, you know, all in a Notion board. So that gives us a sense of owning what we say we're going to do and showing that accountability. It also gives us line of sight into what all of our peer leaders are doing. So then, you know, we can see where there's synergies, where there could even be overlap. So, and that's something that isn't just a boring reporting meeting. It's something that I actually look forward to, and I think the rest of my team does as well, that like you start every Monday morning with this routine.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I will now move to Emily. So Emily, you know, we talk about change, and I have another question for our audience. Is there anyone in the audience who actually love to change? Like, who's excited when I come to you and say, okay, guys, we need to change? Anyone excited? I don't see any hands. Oh, actually, I see 2. Thank you for that. And by the way, I'm so sorry, I forgot to say that. So we will actually take your questions at the end of the session. We have a mic for that. So please think about your questions, and then we will ask you to share them. But anyways, change is hard. We don't like changing too much. Change can be tiring, exhausting. So what do you do with your teams to develop a different attitude to change? Sometimes we call it change readiness muscle. How can we work with that so that our teams get stronger and more confident in all adaptability and dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity, actually embracing it?
Yeah, so right now, I guess probably everyone is aware, but AI is coming in like every day, every minute of every day, and it's so much change. And from an IT perspective, we're constantly the bottleneck. We are slowing down the change because every day I'm getting 5 requests for a new AI thing that I need to look at. So I was doing this and I didn't even know from the manifesto, but we've really focused on how we look at projects now, and instead of looking at project goals, we constantly are looking at business goals and what the business is intending to achieve. So then when anything's coming in, any change is coming in, we're looking at that goal, and I've empowered my teams and the business as well to take a look at any change, any solution, any AI, and say, does this support our business goals? And if it does, they're empowered to make that change to go forward with that AI solution. Now they're not going to get $1 million, but they're empowered to make the change, make the decision. As long as they can answer yes, this supports our business goals, they can do it. And then we're really encouraging piloting, so they can have $10, not $10 million, do the pilot, and they're constantly now, like the AI solutions are coming in, they're assessing it, they're making a decision, they're saying yes, and they're doing these constant pilots. And sometimes they're working, sometimes they're not. But the habit that they're now, most of the companies constantly looking at solutions and running pilots, allows them to actually be ready for change. It's like they're already changing. They're looking for change because they're making the decisions and they're running these pilots. So yeah, I think that them almost actually leading the change prepares them very well for the change.
Thank you. I love that. And I love the way you explained that people need to be focused on these business objectives, then they work on something. So in our language at PMI, we call it business acumen. Business acumen is our ability to understand essentially the why behind the change. And, we did an interview about it recently with one professor from Harvard who's focusing on future readiness, future adaptability. And I asked him, what would be your advice for professionals like us to develop our business acumen? And he said, curiosity. Like, be curious. Just ask questions. When you enter a new team, just ask them, like, hey, guys, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it, right? So curiosity, it's really awesome. But when you mentioned all these pilots, I would have another question for you, a follow-up question, right? Because, I tried to picture it. So, and really, I can't help myself. I'm looking around here. There's so many innovations here. Everybody's doing their thing, right? So there's some idea, they jump on it, they develop a tool for I don't know what. I tried yesterday removing wrinkles from my face, right? And there's another innovation over there with bikes and everything. So what kind of rules do you need to implement in your organization to support all these pilots so that we don't block people, we encourage their creativity and empowerment and all of that, but at the same time, we don't turn it into too much of chaos?
Yeah. So I think we've switched governance, if you want to call it, from a control base to a framework of enablement. Being CIO, there are some things that I can't negotiate on based around the safety of our data and of our company. So instead of, again, me having to look and assess every single detail of every single one of these technologies, these applications, I can't watch a demo and understand all of the coding and the detail of hundreds of applications. So I have created a governance around cybersecurity and around data protection. Sometimes there's an architecture component, but for the most part, our architecture is, these pilots aren't going to come into our architecture in that way. So I give, everyone has the cyber requirements and the data protection requirements, and they kind of, they're assessing these with the vendors. Certainly, we can help if they need that, but as long as they're meeting those two like non-negotiables, they're okay. I don't need to understand how it's working. I don't need to look at the details of it. We're again trying to empower them to the framework, and not control them, and not make this central decision, me be the bottleneck. That's like in the project decision part. And then as the pilot's going on, I would say from a governance standpoint, we're not looking at the project plan and where this project is to the plan. Some of these projects are 6 days long. So we're looking at the outcomes, and do these outcomes meet the business goals? Are they supporting the business goals? So that's the kind of governance we're looking at throughout a project, less than, yes, we have project managers, they're managing a project, they're doing that stuff, but we're more concerned with the outcomes from a governance standpoint.
So focus on outcomes, and don't forget to work with your colleagues to properly integrate all your solutions with all the other things that they have to take care about. All right, perfect. So I will now move to another topic of our discussion, and that is us, people, human beings, right? We would still love to be in the center of all this change. And by the way, don't get me wrong, we are. But the reason why we focus on human centricity, people centricity, when we talk about enterprise agility, is also some very interesting effect. When we were working on that manifesto for enterprise agility, we interviewed a lot of CEOs, and one of them, he said something that was really interesting for me. He said that when you have organizations that can adapt quickly, it's actually strengthening the internal trust, because then teams and employees, they see that if something happens, disruption, then that enterprise organization can adjust and still take care of their people. The organization is able to find solutions. And that's really about putting people in the center of that change. So I will now go to Christopher. Christopher, you are Vice President for Talent Enablement. So people are, I believe, on top of your mind. And then actually, I heard you saying many times when you say this beautiful sentence, and you said that change only sticks when it's designed around people. So my question for you is, how do you actually put that in practice? How do you work with people and that human centricity in your discovery, exploration, experimentation, all of that, so that you design change that will then live, be sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's one thing we have to remind ourselves is that we're so focused on the technology changing, but people haven't really changed. We're still essentially very similar to our ancestors from like thousands of years ago. And even across these topics, like I just keep thinking, one thing you should recognize about people is like we actually don't have unlimited cognition. Your brain has limited cognition, and it uses a ton of energy just to make decisions every day. And so even when I think about purpose, when we think about executing on purpose, to what extent are we providing unnecessary information to people? To what extent are we asking them to attend to things that they actually don't need to use their attention for? And so when I think about this question around, essentially how do we design around people, I think the first thing we all need to accept is just the natural limitations of being a human being. And that's okay. And I know it sounds kitschy, maybe a little foo-foo, but it's true. And when I see projects go awry, it's because we make these assumptions that somehow people could just be different. If I had just had different talent, if they just knew better, if they just had more time, if they just worked harder. And the fact of the matter is you're designing solutions that are fundamentally in tension with what it means to be human. And we're seeing that every day. So even on the LinkedIn platform, we've seen posts about change fatigue, people feeling overwhelmed at work have gone up about 56% recently. mean, that's a huge surge of folks just saying, my employer is asking me to do things, or things are shifting in the world, and I don't quite get it. It's taxing my brain, and I'm feeling really stressed out. And if you're feeling really stressed out, you're not actually doing the things you'd rather be doing. So what we've really focused on as part of our AI transformation at LinkedIn is we're doubling down within the global talent organization on human-centered design. And I think I've gotten this question of, like, design thinking's been around for a while. I think people have understood, like, some of the cool things it's produced for consumer products, but I don't know that we've necessarily seen it as sort of an agility accelerator, because when we get things wrong, it's because we were out of cognition, we made a lot of assumptions, we didn't talk to the right people. Some people are just naturally really good at that, but then you're leaving it up to luck. So when you're designing around people, you're actually moving things that your brain has to process and think about to how do we just make it part of the way we do work. So I love that you use this notion of discovery and design. How many people here have been on a project that just completely flopped and no one knew why? Everybody, right? It just happens because, and you think about it, like, did you do a pre-mortem ahead of time? When you did your discovery, did you check your assumptions at the door? Did you think about what the best question was? And it's not always about focus groups. Sometimes you just have to go and observe what it means to get work done in an organization. So when I think about change management, which I think about a lot, I think about designing solutions that really accept humanity. I think really respect and honor the fact that we are all going through a lot right now. And the more we can offload key decisions around how we discover, how we design, how we prototype, how we iterate, take some of the ego out of it as leaders to say it's okay if we tested an assumption and it was wrong. That's really what I think when I think about designing for humans, because if we're doing that, then there's way more time spent on the curiosity, the next cool AI tool, and really putting that creativity to use, and less time spent on all of the worrying and lack of time to really process and think.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Christopher, that you're saying that, because I work with a lot of data in my normal daily job, and recently I came across this really stunning number. It's from a study from Microsoft, and Microsoft, like, we are surrounded by their tools, so they know very well what we are doing. And so they found out that around 80%, which is basically almost everyone, right? Around 80% of employees and senior leaders say these days that they don't have energy or time to do their normal work properly because of all the distractions and all the cognitive load that we are facing. So by the way, it's a brilliant study by Microsoft. They also discovered that there is a huge spike in using PowerPoint application, roughly around 5% before 5 minutes before a meeting starts. So that was really interesting. Like, we do a lot of last-minute stuff because we don't have time to prepare before. So this human centricity in design and in looking for solutions is really crucial. So Christopher, and I will kind of try to leverage the fact that you are from LinkedIn, right? So is there any example of something that you implemented recently or something that you did with human-centric design that really made a difference?
I think the jury's still out. I'm a big fan of this question about habits, and I think there's two habits I just want to talk about really quickly that are super easy to implement. So before every meeting, we used to do something I think maybe sounds really corporate, but it was like, this meeting will be a success if. Like, we ask everyone to really just articulate that and name that. And then we thought that's not really enough in this human-centered design world. We also need to start with a reminder of what the problem is we're solving and for who and what do we know about them. So that we don't start meetings just jumping into, oh, we want to solve a technology issue. We really need to understand how it contributes to the purpose. We need to remind ourselves of the job that we're being hired to do. And I think that's a mental switch if you work primarily with internal stakeholders, because you start to think, why would someone hire HR to do something? Like, what are we doing for them? And then with AI, it's like, well, could they just do it on their own? Would they prefer that? So really just naming the problem, the job to be done, and who it is that has hired you to do this, and what do we know about them. I heard in the audience earlier, I like change if it's going to fix something for me. Well, let's at least remind ourselves on what it is that we're going to do to eliminate that drag. The other thing that we had a great conversation last night at dinner, and we were all joking around about like how certain companies have they like to give projects names, like funny names, like Project Arctic Cat or like fill in the blank. People like to use a lot of acronyms, which is like the TAL is end of time. And we don't even realize it if we've been in a corporate atmosphere that we use a lot of jargon. And as a part of change management, what I've tried to do over the last major transformation efforts that I've led is before we go to market with anything we do, we scrum it for jargon. Is this plain, and AI is really helpful with this, by the way, is this plain spoken enough? Could this truly be read at an 8th grade reading level? And it's so antithetical to some of like the corporate jargon we sit in meetings. And the reason why I bring that up from a human-centered perspective is because I talked a lot about cognitive load. If you're actually taking 3 steps before you actually get to the point to truly understand what it is we're trying to solve, because you had to decode the project name and then the acronym and then all of this jargon when you could have just said it in the most plain-spoken, easy way possible, you've created more tax on the human system as opposed to just making it really easy. So those would be, really 2 sort of nudges or rituals or habits I would recommend is like, definitely name the problem, revisit who it is and what it is that you're solving for and how is this going to make their life better, or acknowledge if it's not. And I'm happy to talk about that too, because I think that's another thing that happens in companies is we think we want everyone to desire something, and in fact, sometimes the choice is not that desirable. But then also, it's okay just to hit AI and be like, could my 7th grader understand this? And then you're just saving everybody a whole lot of time and just, brain power and just getting to the point.
Perfect. So I'm learning as we speak right now. From now on, I'm going to test everything on my 8-year-old son. Okay, cool. So moving on, you talked about habits, Rachel. So I will actually use that for my next question to Emily, because, we talk about change. We talk about these good habits, how to test ourselves, challenge ourselves. Are we clear enough, right? But how about resilience and continuous learning? By the way, the reason why I'm bringing that up, because from our research, it also came up that there are 2 major challenges that CEOs are facing today. So the challenge number 1 is the ability to connect strategy with execution. And we already talked about that a little bit. But right after that, there's another big challenge, and that is how to continuously upgrade talent in their organizations. How to set systems for us so that we can learn continuously and develop our own resilience for this change. And that's my question to Emily. So what would be your recommendation? How can we do that?
I think building more cross-functional teams and developing your roles more broadly than your silo goes a long way. Because if you're doing the work daily, you're learning it. Because a standard training program, a class you go to, yes, you're going to learn 20% or whatever that number is, but actually acting on what if you're doing it every day, you're learning it. From an IT perspective, I really need my teams to understand the business processes. We cannot provide technical solutions if we don't understand the business. So, I've been working a lot with operations leads as of late to develop roles within the business that, data analytics, that's an actual business person, or more like business analyst type roles that actually sit within the business and not within IT. So I would recommend, looking at what those roles encompass, so that there is more learning across. And I know, people have mentioned rotations, and like a Procter & Gamble, Ford Motor Company, I think that's a requirement. You have to change jobs every 2 years. You have to change markets. You have to change brands. You have to change countries, and that's a requirement. And that kind of a rotation, I think, does definitely help with learning, and it's very cyclical in that you're going to a new place and you're learning a brand new thing and you're upping your skills, but you're also bringing what you learned from the last place with you to teach others. But if it's like a rotation where I want to send my business analyst to the business to do that job for 20% of their day, and 80% we were talking, like, that doesn't generally work so well. And it doesn't happen that way. And people don't really measure and manage their time by percentages. So in theory, I think, people really, as Christopher said, do like love the idea of rotating and having people go into other departments and work in other areas. But the reality is that doesn't work that well. But like in a Procter & Gamble or something where you actually truly leave that old job and rotate into a new one, and you're required to go from like marketing to purchasing, I think that works better. But yeah, so that's...
All right, so we will keep exploring that topic a little bit, but I will now go back to one of the original themes that we had when we started this panel, and that is AI. So let's go back to AI and technology, because, with AI, we are really empowered right now. So again, another question for you, who is using at least some AI tool in your work to be faster? Yeah, I see some hands, right? To have access to data faster. To cheat when you need to develop something in last minute. Okay, I see people nodding. You don't need to raise your hands. It's okay. I see you. I do the same, right? So it's a great tool, but it's also leading to some sort of distribution, distributed data, distributed talent, distributed access to information. And still, we want to use AI to create some impact, to create something real. But just the technology itself typically is not enough, right? It's just a tool. So my question to Liz, going back to Liz, so when we talk about AI, how can you really turn AI into something impactful? How do you do that? And how you are building your teams and organization that you can use AI to create a strategic capability, something that is impactful long term and not just a tool?
Yeah, so when we use the term AI, it's so broad, and I like to think of it in two ends of the spectrum, one being everyday AI. So you may have ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever it is you use that you have maybe a personal or enterprise version of, that's your daily use of AI. Like I always have this tab open on my computer, and I go to it to do my research or this, that, the other. That's great, and it sounds like from everyone who raised their hands in the audience, you're all doing this as well. The other end of the spectrum is what I would call game-changing AI, which then gets into your question exactly on what is strategic and what is the why behind what we're trying to build here. So you can look from an industry standpoint, you could look at it from a company standpoint, and think about what am I trying to create, and even take AI out of the equation for a moment. Like, what am I endeavoring to create that is game-changing for my end customer or whoever your stakeholder, buyer, consumer is? And then, again, back to the strategy of looking at that North Star, what do you need to reverse engineer and enable that? So when we got back to our rooms last night, I got an email from a CEO of a client that I'm working with right now that is an AI and robotics startup. They were mentioned at the NVIDIA conference that's also happening this week by Jensen and by another one of the industry leaders. And this was an example of what I would absolutely consider game-changing AI. So these sorts of opportunities are not ones that you or your teams are going to, come up with very frequently. This could be a once in a career or once in a lifetime opportunity in some cases. So when I use the term game-changing AI, I don't expect you to put pressure on yourselves or your organizations to, every year come up with a project of this scale or import. But being able to differentiate how and where you're using and applying AI, and if you are using it as a tool, or if you are using it to really be a new category maker, or completely transform something in your industry or in your corporation, that's the extremes in which I think we need to look at this. The more strategic being more a capability, and the more daily use of AI being more of a tool.
Right, but I have also one hard question for you. And now, tell us the truth. We need honesty, right? Candid answer. How do you avoid building solutions that no one is going to use?
Well, it goes back exactly to what Christopher was saying, in my opinion, about human-centered design. So while I was at IBM, I got super indoctrinated into IBM design thinking and got lots of certifications and badges and became an IBM designated designer, got some special letter from Jenny Rometty and all the whole nine. That will help you. It's not going to cure everything, but that will help you to make sure that you're building something that your market actually needs, or that might meet an unmet need. Or if you're really doing your research and you're doing contextual inquiry, which is, I think, the single best answer to your question, where maybe some of us spend too much time trapped in our offices and trapped in front of our computer screens and not out in the world with the people that we're serving or building these things for to see how will they use it, and make sure that, you can't always guarantee 100% adoption, but you can definitely design for it to be successful by focusing on the humans.
Yeah, thank you. And actually what we again see on our data, and also when we talk to people and when we talk to all these CEOs, it's really important to make decisions in your organization at that place where the value is actually created. So essentially, if you want to create something for people, you need to work with people, and the decisions should be made by people who have that information. Or when we talk about customers, we should encourage decisions to be made by those teams who actually work with customers directly, so that we have fast access and direct access to that information. But we also know that in practice, in reality, it's not that easy to achieve that. So let me now go back to Emily. So what are you doing? How are you implementing this in your organization so that you really make decisions at that moment where that value is created, so that you work with data that are real and really helpful?
Yeah, and we have people everywhere. I have a person on my team in New Zealand. I have a person in Mexico. We have people everywhere, and it's very all over the place. And I do find that decisions come back to this central place, and there's a bottleneck there. And so, like I mentioned earlier, again, understanding our business goals and making sure everybody clearly understands them. And, we get together twice a year, the entire company, and we spend time talking about the goals and how we're going to achieve them. So as we're moving forward, now I think people, because they understand the goals, they're enabled to make those decisions where they're doing the work, where they have the most expertise and the most knowledge. And it's been a while. It took us a while, right? Because I'm scary and I might hurt you. If you go buy AI software and you don't talk to me, that's going to be a problem. So we had to really make people feel better that I'm not the software, the AI czar anymore. If you can answer the question that this will solve or is supporting a business goal, and you can say yes to that, you can make the decision. You can go forward with that, and I'm not going to hurt you. So, it has taken some time of us not hurting them to have them move forward, but it's so much faster. They feel much more empowered, and again, if it supports the business goals, they can do it.
Awesome. So it's, again, a lot about that trust that has to come together with empowerment. So, Christopher, let me now move to you. So what is your approach to that? Do you have any magic wand for the real empowerment and removing bottlenecks by making decisions only in the central place? What would be your recipe for that?
I think very similar. There's always this question, and this has been a long question, of how do we delegate decision further to where the work is happening? And I think you have to understand the tensions there, right? If you're working on something so specific, you may not see the bigger picture. So I think history has taught us that senior leaders make decisions because they better understand where that decision lands in the bigger picture. But then it forces us as leaders to think, well, how do we make sure that our organization is designed for information flow so that information isn't just held at the top of the organization, that many other people could have the same access to that organization or that information. So I see it as an org design problem. I also see it as a cultural problem, and this is one thing that blew my mind. It's like a very simple piece of history that I learned that it made sense when I learned it, but it just makes so much sense now. Is a lot of management practices actually started after World War II. And what that means is that when people came back from the war, they started a lot of companies. And when they started those companies, they used the same practices that they learned in the military. And this is how we ended up with so many militaristic terms in organizations, even a mission statement, for example, an operating rhythm, right? So I also think what's changing now, we're at this inflection point where we need to start challenging conventional wisdom. That just because you're in an org chart somewhere at the top that you get to make the decision. And what AI is letting us do is on two things. One, open up access to information to everybody to be able to ask questions to better understand where that decision lands in the organization. And two, challenge leaders on, am I really just the right person to make this decision, or are we moving from org charts to what we call work charts? And the work chart is, who do I need to know to get the best information, the diverse perspectives to make a really good decision, and I have the big picture, and I don't have leaders in the way, really operating from a place from like 1952. I think we've all kind of moved, hopefully are starting to move on from that. So that's really going to unlock velocity, quicker decision making, just in understanding those 2 points alone. I also think the last thing that I've really done in the last couple of organizations is, like, we have something called a DRI. I just talked about acronyms, and then I used one, a directly responsible individual. And so who is that person? And when we started assigning that, it was always like, who's the vice president, right? And we had to challenge that and say, but you're not the actual person showing up to that meeting, like, knowing all the things. It's the person that reports to you, or even the person that reports to them. And so everyone agreed with that proposition. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's like, the real fun question after that was, well, what am I supposed to do? And, you're supposed to coach. You're supposed to mentor. You're supposed to help people understand what you know to be true in making really hard decisions. And that's equally as valuable. So I see this as an org design situation. I see this as also a cultural transformation that's happening, I think, across, at least I would say, in America right now.
Yeah, and I would say not only in America. Recently there are some books and studies that are really looking at the history of organizations, how we evolved, how it's impacting culture, decision making, and then how should we keep evolving further. There is a great book by British economist Sir John Kay to be precise. It's called The Corporation of 21st Century. Then that's a lot about empowerment, distributed talent, and basically saying that talent is our new capital. And when we talk about capital, money, we can't skip this topic, right? Because when we talk about how our decisions are made, how our organizations operate, we need to understand how money flows, because that impacts your funding, that impacts where organizations put their effort, how projects get funded, how these decisions are made. So that's always one of my favorite questions when we talk about transformations and agility and being better at creating value. So, Emily, we know that funding determines behavior, right? We know how to optimize our business cases to get my innovation approved, right? But we don't want only that. We also want people to be incentivized for learning, for developing these solutions, not only like following business cases. So what is your recipe for that? How can we reward impact creation and not only like doing the activity itself?
Yeah, so again, back to empowering people to make the decisions where the work is done. If they come to us with a solution, and a lot of these AI solutions are like $20 a month, and you have 3 people using it. So we're not asking. Well, those are approved, and I would say the funding piece that we're putting on is we're willing to fund these projects, but we really want everyone, especially in the AI space, to do pilots, to prove out the outcomes before we're going to give you full funding. We have found many times that AI is not doing what it's promised. And I would recommend do not give full funding to a full AI project before you've done a pilot and a proof of concept, because it doesn't always work. And you go to the demo and you see it, and it's not what it is. And so my teams now are very good. They're assessing this AI. We get the outcome. We just did something. I don't know if anybody's in the retail or CPG space, but Glimpse is an AI tool that works specifically with chargebacks. And if you guys are at all familiar, like Target, Walmart, all these companies are charging you back money because, oh, your shipment was short, or we don't have a proof of delivery, or you didn't send the ASN in time. So there's several people in every company probably that are just working as part of their job on chargebacks, going to find bills of lading and proof of deliveries and packing slips, and then they go into the portal for this customer and they dispute it and they provide the evidence, and then they're following up, and it's hours and hours and hours of time, and we don't get a lot of the money back. So Glimpse is an AI tool that basically has AI agents that go and do that. They collect all of the necessary documents, they log into your systems to get whatever information they need there. They go into maybe your EDI portals to see proof that, yes, we did send the ASN on this date. And then they go into the customer portals and file the disputes for you and follow up. And that is something that definitely supports our business goals of increasing revenue. And their promise is 91% success rate on getting money back. So, the teams all were like, let's go, we need to do it, we're going to do it. And we said, we'll give you the funding for the pilot for one customer. And if it's proven, yes, you can have the funding. And I think really doing these kind of stages, these pilots, looking at the outcomes, and then providing the full funding is much better approach with AI. We have seen many times where we just had one user and or 3 licenses, and it did not work. It did not do. I'm in beauty. It did not change the strands of hair, but if that's what we wanted it to do. So I would say test and learn. If you want your money, get the outcomes, and then you can have the full banana there.
All right, I think that's a good advice, and we are getting back to that. Focus on the outcome, focus on impact. So at this time, I'm actually looking at the timer on the floor, which tells me that we are almost at the end of our panel discussion, and now we are open for your questions. So there is a mic in the middle, so the person with a lot of courage can take that mic and ask us anything. Oh, I see a person over there. So let's go for it.
That's it? Okay, it sounds. Now, first of all, congratulations on the panel. I'm from Lima, Peru. I have one question. Maybe it's more for Liz from what you say, but feel free to jump in because I really like the opinions. You talk about the point B of getting into these valuable use cases and strategic transformation. But my main question is, in Peru, we have a lot of companies that are very traditional in the way they operate. So the daily basis of the business usually runs over them in terms of incentives and how management thinks about growth and stuff. So how do you face those types of transformations when you try them to become more AI-driven, because you can see what's coming and what could threat the business, but they're so focused on the present that not necessarily have that buy-in or that process to make that change. What would be your approach?
Yeah, so what I have seen historically, depending on the size of the organization, some organizations will make a new co, or that this could be more informal, like a skunk works, to be able to rapidly innovate, come up with new ideas, and as these ideas become successful and spread, you can seed those across the other parts of the organization that are maybe more traditional. But your question, I think, applies as well to industries that are very risk averse. They could be risk averse because they are highly regulated industries, or for other reasons, like working in healthcare, you have people's lives on the line, so you can't just experiment. But I think that you can, and I did learn this and was, in fact, a little bit surprised when I was working at the hospital. I was going out there to the point of change management and trying to find the people that were in the departments that were most interested in digital transformation. So 3 of the people who raised their hands, like, hey, come and work and spend time with me in my department, was the ER, the head of surgery, and the head of pediatrics. And these were all parts of the hospital that, like, the stakes are very high in all of those cases. And they were the hand raisers that said, like, I want to be not exactly your guinea pig, but, like, start with me. Like, bring your, like, let's show the success to the rest of the organization, which that is exactly what we did. So that is, I think, another thing that you can do is, once you have your vision and your strategy and you can express that in a convincing way, look for those hand raisers so that you have successes that you can seed, and then incubate that. And, like, good work will spread contagiously because people will want that thing, and then it creates a little bit of FOMO inside the organization that people are like, I need some of this over here. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yes.
I would add as well, I love that too. This, like, I call that the coalition of the willing. Find your coalition of the willing if you can. But the one thing that I think is really hard about change management is oftentimes when we're looking to change something, it's coming in the form of an Excel sheet or a PowerPoint presentation. And to the extent things can be tangible, is actually much more brain friendly. There's this one example. It's from a textbook. It's from John Cotter. He talked about, an example where somebody was trying to make a change with the number of gloves they were selling, and would come to these meetings and say, we have too many gloves we're selling, and everyone would say, yeah. There's this distance bias in your brain, but when you're working with leaders, sometimes you need to take a box of those gloves and dump it on the table and say, see, there's 384 gloves here. And so obviously you can't always have the opportunity to do that, but one thing I definitely try to think about when I'm sort of making a case for change is, what's the burning platform, but also, is there something tangible I can show? Is there a prototype or a proof of concept that really connects to somebody's more, like, tangible kind of tacit thinking, so it doesn't seem like, oh, here's yet another idea on yet another PowerPoint, or, like, here's yet another model in an Excel sheet, but it's like, I can actually see the insanity on the table right in front of my eyes. And so I think that goes a long way. I also recognize how challenging that can be, just to even get the time to do that. And also, not all problems we solve are tangible.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, thank you so much for the question. By the way, I read about their example also in the book called Switch, which is, I think, the best approach to change that I ever got familiar with. So we have another question, I see. Thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you for being here today. My question is for Christopher. I'm curious if you've seen the culture of adoption in companies. I think it's growing. I think it's going to pick up more momentum. But as for AI, is Lincoln thinking it's going to move it to being its own industry? Like when technology, the internet came out, then we started having all these new positions in companies. And so I'm curious about that and see the trajectory of where LinkedIn is taken, whether it's going to identify AI as its own industry eventually, if it's going that route.
That's a great question. I don't have data on that. I do have data on, we're seeing a tremendous increase on the platform of number of AI jobs, of course. So just the number of titles, head of AI, AI engineer. So that job category has definitely taken off. But the thing that is most interesting to me is small businesses are taking off, just in a way that we haven't seen. Year over year, we've seen a 60% increase in people changing their title to founder, a 90% increase in individuals changing their title to creator. And so I don't have data to suggest any sort of major industry swings because it seems very much like it's infiltrating jobs right now within organizations. But my big bet is you're going to see a lot more entrepreneurial, a lot more small businesses and entrepreneurs really start to challenge some of these big enterprises in ways we haven't seen before. Gen Z 4 and 10 are really looking at how they can be founders and creators. So that to me is actually the bigger pivot that I do have some data on. But I think it's a great question, and I'll come back next year and let you know if we see something different.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I am sensing a line forming over there with questions. No worries, we have time. We are here for you. So please go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to be quick then. At the beginning, you mentioned about changes to the Agile process because of AI. And you mentioned like, oh, we got a weekly meeting, we're going to use Notion. But it kind of sounds like standard processes. Like you have, next you're going to mention a daily stand-up. So maybe I'm missing something, but could you expand on it, the actual changes beyond the traditional for the, velocity of AI?
Yeah, so I can take that question. It's kind of like our domain. So what we are seeing is that currently organizations face so many changes at once. We are changing the way we work. Our tools are changing. We need to innovate. Our organization structure is changing. When we talk about empowerment, incentives, we are changing mechanisms that are changing culture. So many changes. And what's starting to be super important is the way we collaborate. We are able to work together, because if we don't, we create solutions that do not fit with other solutions in the organization. So processes always important, but we need to design processes in a way that still allow for that flexibility. So that approach is really like focusing on the outcome, what we want to achieve, and design around that, instead of designing process for process. And then in our discipline, in the broader project management discipline, what we see on data that like approaches that are about purely focused on one thing are no longer working. We need professionals to be fluent, equipped with full continuum of different practices, and then select the best fit for the problem that they are solving for.
Customization?
Yeah, you can call it that, and it's really about being curious and open-minded, and essentially not to be too stuck in one ways of working, but really be open that there are more ways of working, and we just need to keep adjusting as we move forward. Thank you so much. Right, I see whoever else is on the line.
All right, I just want to thank all the panelists first. This question is for all of you. Strategy shifts with a large human toll are becoming more and more commonplace. What are one or two things that employees in today's world can do to future-proof themselves? And also, I was just laid off as a result of one of these strategy shifts, so if you or any of your peers are hiring, let's talk. Thank you.
Thank you. So who wants to take it up? So how do we future-proof ourselves? Who wants to go for it?
I think I am a living example of how I try to future-proof myself. I am taking an MIT course right now on AI, and I feel like if you adopt the principles of being a lifelong learner, that's not going to be a magic bullet, but it's going to help to make sure that your skills are current. And this is, to me, the best way that you can future-proof yourself and make sure that whatever you're doing, you could use LinkedIn, for example, as a great platform to do this, that you are becoming known for something. That doesn't mean that you need to become a thought leader and start podcasting and publishing and doing all of this stuff, but make it clear what you are known for, what people should think of you for, what some people like to say what your superpower is. I think the clearer that comes through, whether that's your profile, your resume, whatever, you need that kernel that locks into someone's mind when they see your face or hear your name.
Yeah, I can add to that the best way to future-proof yourself is really be the CEO of your own life, of your own career. Own it. Like we just yesterday, we had this dinner. We had a lot of fun around the dinner, and we talked about this book that our friends wrote, Dave Pryor and Stuart Young, and the book is called "No One is Going to Save Yourself." And that book is full of different practices and advice, how you can work on yourself, approach your life with curiosity, your career with curiosity, to future-proof yourself. But essentially, it's on us. Emily, you want to?
No, I was just going to say, I know that, I'm learning and taking a ton of certifications for AI as well. And I know people think that AI is replacing people. I'm not seeing that approach. We're not taking that approach. The approach we're taking is AI is not going to replace people. People who use AI are going to replace people who do not use AI. So, AI is not, the active AI, at least how we're approaching it, is not going to prevent you from having a future. It's going to prevent you from having a future if you don't use it.
I just have a quick add. I would say work your network. Yeah. That's been as strategy shifts. I mean, we're all experiencing it together. Work your network. How are you thinking about this? What are you doing? I mean, and there's research that those soft connections are actually more helpful in finding new work and jobs than harder connect. And so soft connections are like people you could meet today that you just you connect with, that maybe you don't talk to every day, but they can actually help you down the road. So work your network.
I might need some AI people if you're looking for a job.
Thank you. So work your network, be in charge of your career. Okay, I see another question coming up.
Yeah, there's all these new technologies with XR and AI and game-based learning, and I differentiate that from gamification, by the way. And one thing I think is true is that all of those create output, but they don't create wisdom. And so if you think about how we need to be shifting, and I'm really in the world of education and training and so on, we really have to shift from getting the output and then how do we use it effectively. And I was in another session which really struck me, in productivity is, a big deal in corporate, right? And productivity and using your time effectively and whatever, and you're always got to be busy and whatever. But really what has to happen is we do the output from the tools and then create space to really integrate everything and create that wisdom. And I'm actually creating a research study on what I call the 5-dimensional framework for educational design, because there really is kind of a space-time energy, just energy activation kind of thing. Because we have to really look at that more sensibly to say, what are these tools, where can they be used effectively, and where should they not be used, and then how do we integrate it with the people part, which you guys are talking about, the human operating system. So I'm curious, what you think about that kind of philosophy of saying this is output and this is wisdom, and we need to bridge that gap.
Perfect. That's a beautiful question. Who wants to take it on? Okay, Christopher.
I think when we frame things as productivity, it feels so scary. I feel like when someone puts that in front of me, I'm like, oh, am I not moving fast enough? Am I not smart enough? It doesn't put me in and you'll know that, it doesn't put you in a learning mindset, where I have to be a little bit more excited, a little bit more future focused. It has to feel like I have some confidence. So I think the reframe that we've been thinking about is it's really about value driven. And I think that gets to the question, I hope anyway, of when you're deriving value and you can measure value, it does take a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of technology and some real hard thinking of not setting the goal as, did I do this faster? It's really the question is did I create something better and different and useful? Yeah. And so that's what I'd recommend to folks is we've gotten to this point where speed is currency, and we're kind of performative of if I can do it faster, that means I win. But we've said it on a couple of times on stage. If you did it faster, but it was AI slop, or if you did it faster and no one used it, so the speed as currency really has to shift. I know we want to work faster, but it's really about the value derived and for whom, and maybe the impact in the life you've changed, and not always thinking about it in terms of the speed at which it was done.
Yeah, I would add to that. At PMI, we are essentially a community organization. We are serving large community of project professionals, millions of them. And of course, we want to be fast, because there's a lot of people around that who are waiting, why didn't you publish that yet? When are you coming with that? When are you going to address that problem? But that wisdom, in our case, comes from talking to our people. Traveling, visiting, meeting in person, and really putting an effort in understanding what they are facing, what their issues are, what their opportunities are, and how can we help them. So combining that wisdom with connecting with people, networking, talking, understanding, and then using tools to be faster in the way we are addressing that. But thank you so much. That was a great question. Do we have still some more questions? I see a gentleman over there. Okay.
Firstly, thanks for all the insights. Very, very awesome. My question's about the volume of tools that are coming out there, right? Like, there's new tools coming out every day. How do you guys, as an in your organizations, navigate firstly the volume of tools, and then at what point are you custom developing stuff that's like specific to your organization versus off the shelf?
Yeah, I guess that's the build versus buy question, which is the age-old question all companies face. I feel like there are so many point solutions now for name that topic. It's surely overwhelming. If you go to a conference like this, if you go to a conference like CES, you could just be lost in a sea of choices. And to the point we were talking even earlier about decision fatigue, just the amount of processing you need to do around all of these things can be surely overwhelming. I think that there are, just as PMI is a community, there are, I feel like, a lot of communities of practice that have emerged, some of which are very organic and could meet on Slack channels, WhatsApp groups, whatever, that share, here's what's working in my organization, where I feel like I personally see a lot of value as far as outside of my peer group within my company, learn about new things, and that's the best way to be able to, see the forest through the trees. When there is like a sheer number, partially to do with the fact of there being so many new founders and the ease of starting a new business is there, so you can hang up your shingle and sell something, but. Yeah, I think the build versus buy is a strategic question you need to have. I guess you could take it further and say build, buy, or acquire, but that's the first step to see what is the problem you're trying to solve for, and then I definitely take a lot of value out of personal recommendations and personal networks of people I trust.
And this is a very specific, but futurepedia.com. Highly recommend it. It's all AI tools. There's training videos. There's objective reviews. You can spend 3 in the morning on your phone reading through Futurepedia. But again, it's a very tactical, specific thing. But it's another panel type of a thing where you can look at what's out there and what's working.
Yeah, if I may add to that, at PMI internally in our organization, we set up an AI community of practice, which is led by our AI leader, Kathleen Walsh, and then she put together managers and people from across the whole org, and they meet regularly and they just discuss what tools are you using, what tools are helping, and then they run these open hours for the rest of the employees to share their experience and just really help with this internal networking and peer-to-peer learning so that they can pressure test these tools before we scale it up. Thank you. Thank you so much. We are a little bit over time. I hope you don't mind. This was a great discussion. Please, a round of applause for my wonderful panelists. You were awesome, guys, but you guys, you were equally awesome. Thank you so much for all your engagement and all your wonderful questions. Thank you. Have a nice rest of your day.